Block 1. The Boy and the Voice of the Wind. In a small town in southern Poland called Wadowice, winter arrives early. Mist blankets the mountains, and the church bell echoes through the streets like a heartbeat within faith. It's there, among the old walls and the scent of fresh bread from local bakeries, that 7-year-old Adam Kowalski lives, a calm-eyed boy whose words sound like memories. Wadowice is an ordinary town, but it hides a strange coincidence. Decades earlier, it was the birthplace of Karol Joseph Wojtyla, the man the world knew as Pope John Paul II. And it is there, too, that Adam begins to say things no one understands, things that seem to come from a life that isn't his own. Since the age of 3, the boy has spoken about a place with white columns, golden windows, and crowds waving. He says he sometimes dreams of a very high balcony from where he speaks and people weep. His mother, Kasia, always thought it was childish imagination, until the day the boy asked, "Mom, why don't I live in the Vatican anymore?" She froze, thought she had misheard, but Adam repeated it calmly. "I used to live there. I talked to God every day, and people came to see me." If this story has already sent chills down your spine, leave a like and stay with me, because what comes next defies everything we know about soul, memory, and faith. In the following days, Kasia began to notice small things. The boy who had never left Poland started speaking Italian phrases with a Roman accent. During dinner, he looked at his father and said, "Pace e fede sempre." "What does that mean, Adam?" she asked. "Peace and faith, always." Kasia, a school teacher, wrote everything down in a notebook, curious but trying to stay skeptical. Until one night, the boy woke up frightened and said, "The lights in the square, they were so bright," and then came silence. He cried, unable to explain why. He only said that someone had fired a gun, and he felt pain in his chest, a pain that didn't belong to this life. His father, Pyotr, disliked these conversations. A simple, practical man, he said it was all make-believe, but deep down his eyes betrayed something else, fear. Because the more Adam spoke, the more everything began to seem possible. On a freezing Sunday, Father Marek from St. Mary's Church was invited to speak with the boy. Adam greeted him respectfully, hands clasped, and said softly, "Tu habis officium sanctum." The priest turned pale. It was Latin, meaning, "You have a sacred office." "Where did you learn that, my son?" the priest asked. "I used to say it every day when I was him." "Him who, Adam?" The boy replied calmly, "The Pope." Silence filled the room. The priest, the mother, and the father stood motionless. Adam didn't seem to be joking. He spoke like someone remembering, not imagining. In the following weeks, the priest began visiting the family regularly. He brought old photos of the church, images of popes and sacred places. Adam examined each one carefully until he stopped at a single photograph. He pointed and said, "That's how I looked when I still wore the ring of St. Peter." The photo was of John Paul II, smiling from a Vatican balcony. Kasia broke into tears. The priest, stunned, looked at the boy and felt something stir in his chest, a mix of fear and reverence. From that moment on, the impossible began to take shape.
Adam described the interior of the Apostolic Palace, spoke of the Redemptoris Mater Chapel, and named cardinals long deceased. When the priest asked what he remembered about prayer, the boy answered, "I remembered the pain in my legs, the wind in my white robes, and the hands I held. The whole world was there, and yet I felt alone." Those words didn't sound like they came from a child's mouth. They echoed like an old thought, one carried by someone who had borne too much weight. One afternoon, Adam asked his mother to take him to Wadowice's main square where a statue of John Paul II stands. He stood before it for several minutes. Then, with quiet tears, he said, "This is where it all began, and this is where I learned to forgive." Father Marek, accompanying the family, couldn't hold back his tears. He said the child spoke with the serenity reminiscent of the ancient monks. But to Pyotr it was still madness. He would say, "No soul returns, no pope is reborn, it's all in his head." Yet even as he said it, he looked at his son with a doubt that was slowly consuming him. In the following weeks, Adam began to draw. He sketched St. Peter's Square with uncanny precision. Every column, every window, every flag. When his mother asked where he remembered it from, he replied, "I still hear the wind from that place. The wind in Rome is different. It speaks." Kasia shivered. She knew no child his age could imagine something like that. So she decided to record everything on video, proof that it wasn't imagination. The videos showed the boy speaking Italian, describing St. Peter's Basilica, citing names and phrases only someone who had lived there could know. The videos soon reached the University of Krakow, and the case began to attract attention. But before any scientist could try to explain it, Adam did something that left everyone silent. He asked to attend Mass, knelt before the altar, and said in a calm voice, "The body dies, but love remains. It's God breathing inside us." Father Marek choked up. That phrase was almost identical to one of John Paul II's most famous sermons in 1997. But no one had ever shown that recording to the boy. Outside, snow began to fall, and for a moment the sound of the church bell seemed to echo differently, deeper, stronger, as if the wind itself were confirming the impossible. If you believe that nothing happens by chance, subscribe now and stay with me, because what comes next goes beyond faith. It is living proof that the soul never forgets where it came from.
Block 2. The Doubt and the First Proof. After the first recordings of Adam began circulating discreetly among teachers and local clergy, the small town of Wadowice was never the same. Father Marek saw parishioners crowding after Mass, asking for news about the boy who spoke with a saint's voice. But inside the Kowalski home, the atmosphere was very different. The mother's faith grew, and the father's resistance hardened. Pyotr, a man of simple reasoning and a closed heart, couldn't bear to see his wife immersed in what he called a pious fantasy. That night, seated at the table, he spoke quietly but firmly. "Kasia, you need to stop this. He's just a boy. He's confusing dreams." She replied, "And how do you explain the Latin words, the names he's never heard?" Pyotr said nothing. He only clenched his fist, and the glass trembled in his hand. If you believe that certain memories don't die with the body, leave a like and stay with me, because what comes next is the first proof no one has been able to explain. 2 days later, something happened that shook even the most skeptical hearts. While tidying up the room, Kasia found an old coin inside a wooden box that belonged to her husband. Adam saw it, and before anyone could say a word, calmly said, "That's from the year the world stopped for a moment, 1981. Kasia froze. Adam continued, "I kept it after forgiveness overcame hatred. It was the symbol of my second chance." Piotr entered the room and saw the scene. His face went pale. That coin had been a gift from a cousin who had traveled to Rome, a limited Vatican edition minted exactly in 1981, the year of the assassination attempt on John Paul II. No 7-year-old child could have known that. Father Marek was called immediately. He arrived with a small recorder and began asking calm questions. "Adam, do you remember that day?" The boy looked toward the window where snow had begun to fall and replied, "I remember the pain, but I also remember the light. I fell and someone held my head. I told him I forgave him." "You forgave who, my son?" "The man with the sad eyes. He didn't want to kill. He just thought he was saving the world." The priest said nothing. Those words were almost identical to what the Pope himself had said years later, when he visited the man who shot him. How could a 7-year-old child from Wadowice know that? The story began to spread through the country. A small local newspaper published a short note titled, "7-year-old boy claims to remember the life of John Paul II." Within days, reporters from Krakow and Warsaw were knocking on the Kowalskis' door. But Kasia refused interviews. She said it wasn't meant to be a spectacle. It was something that required silence and prayer. Still, one reporter managed to record a brief conversation with the boy. He asked, "Do you believe you really are the Pope reincarnated?" Adam answered serenely, "I am not the Pope. I am the same love he tried to teach." The phrase became a headline the next day, and with it came theologians, psychologists, and even envoys from the church. At the University of Krakow, a team of researchers decided to study the case. They conducted language tests, showed images of Rome, religious objects, and maps. The boy recognized St. Peter's Square without hesitation, pointed to the exact position of the altar, and mentioned a room where there was a wooden crucifix with a crack on the right foot. Days later, the researchers discovered the crucifix was real, an ancient relic kept inside the Apostolic Palace, unseen by the public. While scientists searched for explanations, faith in the village was divided. Some said the boy was a living miracle, others called him a heretic. Father Marek, torn between devotion and fear of defying the church, began documenting everything in secret. One afternoon, as Adam left school, he stopped in front of a shop window displaying old photographs of John Paul II visiting different countries. He pointed at one and said to his mother, "That was in Peru. The blind woman." She cried before she could see. That night, Kasia searched for it and found a real 1985 account, a woman who claimed to have regained her sight after receiving the Pope's blessing in Lima. The same city, the same year, the same story. Kasia began to believe that something far greater was unfolding, but her husband still resisted. All of this is coincidence. He could have heard it at school. At school, Piotr? A 7-year-old reciting Latin and describing secret chapels? The father didn't answer, and in that silence, something inside him began to break. Father Marek, meanwhile, couldn't sleep. He reread his notes and replayed the boy's recordings. Adam's words didn't sound like those of a child. They carried rhythm like prayer and the weight of remembrance. He decided to write to the Bishop of Krakow, reporting the case and asking for guidance. The reply came in a single line. Silence. "Father, Do not awaken ghosts. But it was already too late. The world had been awakened. If you feel that there's something in this story that logic alone can't explain, subscribe to the channel now and stay with me, because what comes next will challenge even the church itself. Block 3. The Confrontation and the Mystery. Winter seemed endless in Wadowice. The cold wind cut through the streets, and the fog hid the church tower like a secret refusing to be revealed. But in that frozen silence, a new storm was about to begin, not in the sky, but within the town's very faith. Recordings of Adam had reached the Vatican before they ever appeared on television. Priests, theologians, and spiritual investigators began to discuss in private the Polish boy who claimed to remember the heart of a pope. Some saw the case as a sign of hope, others as a threat to doctrine. An official letter was sent to the parish of Wadowice. In it, the Bishop of Krakow informed that an emissary would come to assess the veracity of the events and protect the integrity of the church. Father Marek read the document in silence. He knew what it meant. A judgment was coming. If this story has gripped you so far, leave a like and stay with me, because what happens next is the kind of revelation that shakes even those who claim not to believe. The man arrived 2 weeks later. His name was Father Lorenzo Conti, sent directly from the Vatican. A theologian known for exposing false miracles and supposed spiritual phenomena. A stern face, an Italian accent, and the eyes of someone not seeking to understand but to deny. Lorenzo stayed at the parish house and demanded to see the boy. Kasia agreed, though hesitantly. That afternoon, the Kowalski family's small living room felt colder than ever. The visiting priest sat before Adam, placed a crucifix on the table and asked, "Do you know what this represents?" Adam stared and replied, "It is the love mankind forgot to feel." Lorenzo exhaled sharply, skeptical. He took out an old photograph of John Paul II during a private ceremony, an image never made public, and showed it to the boy. "Do you recognize this scene?" Adam studied it carefully and answered, "Yes, it was when the sunlight entered through the window and made the gold on the walls shine. I cried because I realized God was in everything, even in the light." The emissary froze. The photo, taken in 1993, captured exactly that reflection. But no one outside the Vatican knew it. Over the next few days, Father Lorenzo questioned the boy repeatedly. He switched objects, tested different languages, and posed complex theological questions. Adam answered with serenity, sometimes with phrases that sounded like fragments of forgotten sermons. One of them, noted by the emissary, read, "The soul is the only book God does not allow to be closed." That sentence had never been published, but it appeared handwritten in John Paul II's private diary. How could the child possibly know? The Vatican began monitoring the case closely. Meanwhile, in Wadowice, the town was divided. Some called the boy a saint, others a blasphemer. And on certain nights, the church bells seemed to ring by itself, as if the wind whispered the names of those who doubted. Kasia lived between faith and fear. She watched her son lose sleep, speaking in his dreams, saying things that left her breathless. They don't want to understand, because to understand would mean admitting that heaven is bigger than the church's walls. She held him close, trying to calm him, yet inside her grew a haunting certainty that Adam was carrying a burden that wasn't his to bear. That following Sunday, a special Mass was held. Father Lorenzo asked to observe the boy among the congregation in silence. During the homily, a gust and wind blew through the church doors, toppling several candles. Adam lifted his gaze as if recognizing the sound and murmured, "The wind of Rome." After Mass, the emissary requested that the boy be brought to the sacristy. He wanted to perform one final test. He placed 3 objects on the table: a gold ring, an old rosary, and a piece of white cloth stained by time. He said, "One of these objects belonged to John Paul II. Tell me which one." Adam examined them quietly, took a deep breath, and pointed to the rosary. That one. He held it on quiet mornings when his heart ached. The emissary was speechless. The item had truly belonged to the Pope, used during his private prayers before every international trip. No public record mentioned it. Cassia, overwhelmed, wept silently. But Lorenzo's eyes were not filled with faith. They were filled with fear. He knew what he had witnessed, yet also understood the weight it carried for the Church. That night, he wrote a secret report. It ended with a single line: "If this child speaks with memories that are not his own, perhaps God has allowed a soul to relearn the way back home." The next morning, before returning to the Vatican, the emissary asked to say goodbye to the boy. He knelt before him, as if acknowledging something unseen, and said, "If what you say is true, pray for us, for perhaps it is we who have forgotten the way." Adam smiled and replied, "God never forgets anyone. We're the ones who stop listening to the wind." If this story has already stirred what you believe, subscribe now and stay with me, because what happens next will prove that the impossible still breathes among us.
Block 4. The Revelation and the Hidden Legacy. The days following the emissary's visit brought a heavy silence over Wadowicz. Father Merrick avoided speaking about the matter. The faithful whispered during Mass, and even the wind, the same one Adam claimed to hear, seemed to blow softer, as if it too were waiting for answers. News of the confidential report spread quietly. The Vatican neither confirmed nor denied anything, and that alone was enough to reignite the curiosity of journalists and scholars. Meanwhile, Adam, growing more introspective by the day, spent hours drawing in silence. He drew maps, symbols, churches, and something that looked like a spiral path connecting the Vatican to Wadowicz. Cassia, not understanding their meaning, brought the drawings to Father Merrick. He studied them for several minutes before saying softly, "This symbol, it resembles the old papal seals, but there's something else here, a message only he seems to understand." If this story has held you this far, leave a like and stay with me, because what you're about to hear is the kind of revelation that changes everything we think we know about faith, the soul, and destiny. One night, Cassia awoke to the sound of footsteps in her son's room. She found Adam sitting on his bed, staring at the crucifix hanging on the wall. "Mom, I remembered." "Remembered what, my love?" "What I left hidden before I went." She approached him gently. "What did you leave hidden, Adam?" He replied without hesitation, "A diary. I wrote what I couldn't say. It's in Rome, and it will help the world understand what true love is." The next day, Cassia told everything to Father Merrick. Surprised, he recalled an old rumor. During the last years of John Paul II's life, there had been talk of a personal journal, a diary that was never found after his death. Some believed it had been destroyed for containing reflections too intimate about faith and humanity. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. The priest contacted emissary Lorenzo Conti, now back in Rome. Days later, a reply arrived. "The diary exists.
It is kept in a vault of the Apostolic Library. It has never been released. No one outside the Vatican has access. The revelation struck like lightning in the hearts of those following the case. How could a boy who had never left Poland speak of something that officially did not exist? Moved by both doubt and faith, Lorenzo decided to break protocol. He secretly copied one of the diary's pages and sent it to Father Marek. The page contained a single line, written in Polish. Love is the only power capable of being reborn within itself. When the priest showed the copy to the boy, Adam smiled, closed his eyes, and said, "I remembered writing that. It was midnight, and the wind was tapping at the window." Father Marek could barely breathe. The handwriting, the phrasing, the context, everything was real. It was one of the missing pages from John Paul II's private diary. From that day forward, something in the boy changed. He seemed calmer, as if part of him had completed an invisible mission. The nights grew silent again, and even the church bell, once restless, began to ring with peace. But peace for the Vatican meant something else. A few days later, another letter arrived at the parish. The case must be closed. The boy should not be exposed further. Let faith find silence. It was the kind of response meant to hide what could not be denied. Father Marek, torn between obedience and truth, tore apart the letter after reading it. He knew what he had witnessed could never fit inside a report, and that perhaps faith is exactly that, the part of truth the world isn't ready to accept. Kasia decided to protect her son. No interviews, no reporters, no visitors. The family withdrew from public life, and for months, no one spoke of the case again. But that spring, something extraordinary happened. A group of young seminarians in Rome found in the archives of the Apostolic Library a small notebook dated 2005, unsigned. The opening line read, "If I ever return, let it be within a pure soul capable of loving without fear." The diary was signed only with the initials KJW. When the news reached Wadowice, Father Marek rushed to the Kowalski home. Upon hearing it, Adam simply closed his eyes and smiled. Then he remembered too. The priest asked softly, "Remembered what?" "The wind." If you believe that some souls return to finish what they left undone, subscribe now and stay with me, because what happens next will unite science, faith, and the inexplicable in a single destiny. Block 5. The Legacy of the Soul. Spring arrived in Wadowice as if winter had never existed. Flowers bloomed once again around the church, and the bell, for the first time in months, seemed to ring in harmony. But inside the Kowalski home, silence remained the language of faith. Adam no longer spoke much about the Vatican. He spent hours in the garden, watching the clouds move and writing short phrases in a small blue notebook. His mother let him be. She had learned that some words only bloom when the soul is ready to speak them. One morning, Father Marek came to visit. He found the boy sitting by the window, his gaze lost on the horizon. He smiled. "Are you feeling well, Adam?" He said, "Yes, Father. The wind has started talking again." The priest sat beside him and asked, "What did it say?" Adam answered softly, "That the mission is over." If this story has touched you so far, leave a like and stay with me, because what you're about to hear now is the kind of message that stays engraved in the soul. That same afternoon, Kasia found her son asleep, the blue notebook still open on his lap. On the first page, it said, "The soul does not belong to time. It only changes place to keep on loving." In the following days, the boy grew quieter. A sudden fever appeared with no apparent cause. Doctors called it an infection, But Kasia knew, deep down, it was something beyond the body. Adam spent 3 days in the small Wadowice hospital. In his room, he would ask for the window to be opened. He said, "I want to feel the wind come in. It's going to tell me what comes next." On the 3rd day at dusk, the church bell rang on its own. The sound echoed across the hills and filled the hospital halls. Adam looked at his mother, smiled, and whispered, "Now I remember everything." Those were his final words. That night, the wind blew strong, and in the morning, a loose page from the blue notebook was found on Father Madek's desk. It contained a single sentence written in soft handwriting. "Love is the only wind that never dies." The priest kept that page inside his Bible and never showed it to anyone. He would say that some miracles aren't meant to prove anything. They exist only to remind us of what we've forgotten. Months later, the Vatican released a short statement about a case investigated in Poland with no definitive conclusions. But between the cold lines of the document, Father Madek saw something else, a request for silence about the unexplainable. Meanwhile, in the town, Adam's name became legend. Some swore they heard the church bell ring whenever the wind changed direction. Others claimed that on the calmest nights, one could hear a child's voice praying in Italian from inside the church. Kasia never left Wadowice. She continued living in the same house, keeping the blue notebook as one keeps a relic. And sometimes, when the wind blew stronger, she swore she could smell incense and hear a gentle voice whispering, "Faith isn't remembering God, it's letting God remember you." If you believe that nothing is ever lost when love is true, subscribe now and share this story, because somewhere another soul may be waiting for the right wind to remember who it was.